For more than 27 years, the ACLJ has been fighting for freedom and liberty in the United States and around the globe. Chief Counsel Jay Sekulow has argued 12 times before the United States Supreme Court, including several landmark cases protecting religious and constitutional freedoms. The ACLJ is active in the courts, in Congress, and in the public arena.
And joining me now is Jay Sekulow, the Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice.
The Jay Sekulow Live radio program reaches over 1,000 stations nationwide and streams live on Facebook to more than 4 million users daily. With a weekly TV program and an active social media presence, the ACLJ has created a powerful media strategy to continue the fight for freedom and liberty.
Nearly 300,000 people in 2 weeks. If we can do that in a couple of weeks, imagine what we can do in 6 months. Imagine what we can do in a year. Imagine what we can do if we stand together.
Your support makes a critical difference. So thank you for joining with us. Thank you for standing with us as we seek to proclaim freedom and liberty here in the United States and around the globe.
Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow.
Let me give you an update. We've got high-level meetings going on right now to secure the return. I say the return because he's been released from prison. He's at home confinement in Turkey, but the return of the Brunson family to the United States of America. Key meetings on that going on this very week. And Jordan, you've done these bilateral, trilateral, sometimes negotiations. This, we know, we've gotten phase one complete, but phase two is the most important, and that's returning him home.
Yeah, and keeping this story, so, not being complacent in that he's, got in this home confinement in Turkey, and yes, he's got security there, and that's all great. It's all a great first step, and you had to take time last week to celebrate these small victories, because, or else if you don't do that in these long cases, then it's kind of like you're just up against a wall and you never feel like you're making progress. That is a tremendous progress. That being said, until you are ultimately released, you can't take your eye off the ball. And so we need people to continue to talk about this. We need people to continue to share the story, share these updates, share this show, share the broadcast, share the updates we put up at aclj.org. Keep this in the news. I love it when the news is covering it and we're not having to go out and do it ourselves. And we're doing it on radio. But when it's a breaking news update on CNN and it's a reporter doing it from the White House lawn,
even better.
That means that you've gotten past the advocates having to just get out there saying, please cover our story. And so we'll come on, if we need to clarify news, if we need to provide an update. But when you've got it as a major news story that the world is watching, what you don't want is that to drift away. And it hasn't happened today. It's continuing in the news on all major networks. We want to make sure it's there throughout the week.
Yeah, so we're at it's a really critical time. Yep. Donna on Facebook asked a really important question. Turkey's a NATO ally. Do we have an air base in Turkey? Wes, more than an air base.
Yes. It is one of our most strategically important bases in the Eastern Mediterranean in the Middle East. Could we recover if they kicked us out? I mean, no one knows where Erdogan is taking the nation of Turkey. Even absent this crisis we're facing with Pastor Brunson, he could order the U.S. out. We would adjust. We have other allies in the region. They're not NATO members, and we would be okay. But we don't want that to happen because that is a key U.S. installation in that entire part of the world. It is also a key installation within the NATO alliance.
So, Cece, to update everybody here, even though he's out of jail, the trial prep still continues.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, October 12th is the next trial date.
Well, hopefully he's home well before then.
Absolutely. We hope that, pray for that. But you still have to go forward, just like we still had to answer the questions on the UN Working Group on arbitrary detention. You still prepare for everything as if the case is going forward until he is on U.S. soil. We represent Pastor Brunson, and we will continue to represent him.
And then so for those just joining us, this segment of the broadcast, the NDA gets to be the law, and Brunson's in it by name.
Well, yeah, and just as Cece prepares for future trial dates, the legislature, Jay, prepares for outcomes should Pastor Brunson not be home. The National Defense Authorization Act, which is now cleared the House of Representatives, will clear the Senate this week, mentions Andrew Brunson by name. It also gives the president additional leverage points over Turkey. Jay, that is going to be law by the end of the week. So Turkey needs to be watching for this. It's going to be law come Friday.
We've got a lot more ahead on Pastor Brunson's case. I know you're praying for him. We encourage you to do that. More of your comments and calls when we come back. Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, has spoken to his Turkish counterpart about the pastor's detention on these charges that they've drummed up. Christianization, of course, is the focus. He is at home confinement right now. So he's been released from prison, but he's in home confinement, which does not mean he's been released. So in other words, he's not free to return to the United States. He's really not free to leave the apartment unless under very specific guidelines from the Turkish authorities. Cece Howell is a senior counsel with the ACLJ. She's been very involved in this case, leading the ongoing negotiations for the family. But she also spoke to the Brunson family. So let's get an update. As to, obviously, it was last week when we got word that Brunson was removed from the jail to home confinement. That was a very positive first step.
Right. It's not the step that we want. He needs to be on U.S. soil, but it is a positive step. It's a positive step for Pastor Brunson just to physically, emotionally, in all ways to be out of prison.
Let's go ahead and take a phone call, then we're going to get Harry Hutchison involved in the conversation.
Julie called in from California on line 1. Julie, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Hi, Julie.
Thank you, Jordan. Hi, Jay.
Hey.
I have a question and a comment.
Sure.
First of all, how serious do you think the Turkish president is when he's making this statements like, they cannot make Turkey back down with sanctions, and unless we change our attitude, it will lose a strong partner? Do you think he's posturing?
Well, look, I mean, he's in a tough spot too, because there's an element within his own government that is pushing it in a harder right direction, I would call it, or a harder authoritarian perspective is really the better phrase of that. The fact is that they don't want sanctions from the United States. Their economy's not doing great to begin with. I'll bring Harry into it. Hang on, Julie. We'll get to the second part of your question in a moment. But Turkey's economy cannot afford sanctions.
Absolutely not. And they have actually been in a sustained downturn, as I understand it, for the last several years. And their treatment of individuals like Pastor Brunson actually will tend to worsen the economy going forward, because no one knows when they might be next. So, for instance, there used to be a huge travel industry between Great Britain, for instance, and Turkey, but a number of individuals have been caught up in this authoritarian crackdown without warning. They're just tourists, and suddenly, they're in prison. That's a problem.
Yeah, so I mean, this is how
You've been to Turkey.
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I mean, now I'll tell you, when I was there, we were there for a meeting between the ecumenical patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church and the Pope. So security, you can imagine, in a 99% Muslim country, even one that's a NATO ally, very high. So I understand what Andrew Brunson is since having the Turkish security guarding him right now was like, because I was ultimately they were responsible for our safety most of the time we were there, because we were in the patriarchate. So everybody in Turkey knew the Pope, where the Pope was, and where this group of Christians who came from around the world were. And they lined the streets. It was very high security. Obviously, you get the foreign security that comes in as well, secondary, but it's ultimately the Turkish forces who have to take care of you, as you're walking in, protecting you from even general population, which has, as you said, radicals. Remember, a lot of people who have, you've got people as refugee flows that were, at that point, millions were flowing. I think 1 million plus refugees were just walking around Istanbul, basically, from Syria. Some of those, though, were not good, also are bad people that mix in with those refugees from ISIS. So they knew the Pope was there. I mean, so at that point, though, so this is the kind of height of an ISIS conflict. This was the beginning of really, again, they allow it to happen in Turkey. They allow the Pope to be there. They kind of celebrate that because as a strong man, that's a big deal. At the same time, the crackdown was beginning on freedoms once again. And even in our hotel, someone in the hotel wrote the message on a message board for this group, die Christian pigs, ISIS. So That wasn't the Turkish government. It wasn't the hotel, but it could have been hotel staff. Somebody. There are radicals within pushing this government to say, you let out this Christian, your life could be at risk.
Yeah.
And so that is very real in a place where you have 99% Muslim population.
Wes?
Just very unstable right now. And the complicated nature of this cannot be overstated because it involves not only NATO, it involves U.S. security and policy objectives in the Eastern Mediterranean and in the Middle East. And the fact that, just one example of how complicated this is, the fact that a NATO country is planning on buying a Russian weapons system when, in fact, NATO was founded to counter the aggression of Russia, that's very serious and really unthinkable. The NATO Charter states very clearly, and I wrote it down in my notes, members are to safeguard, quote, the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law, unquote. And Turkey is going against every one of those principles.
Harry, in looking at the situation right now, there's a high-risk motive or a high-risk potential if Brunson's not returned to the United States.
Absolutely. So
for Turkey. Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you look at Turkey is facing extremely high inflation. There's a surge in foreign borrowing. And at the same time, they face some internal threats from various members of the population. They've had some difficulty with the Kurds. And so they are also trying to sustain their position in the Middle East. That requires military equipment. And the United States is prepared to prevent the sale and distribution of F-35s to Turkey. We are also prepared going forward, if Pastor Brunson is not released, to impose economic sanctions. So that would compound the current economic difficulties that Turkey is experiencing. So I think President Erdogan faces a stark choice. And actually, it's a fairly simple one. Release all of the Americans who are being held unjustly in Turkish prisons now, or face the consequences, and the consequences for him will not necessarily be good ones.
And then the truth of the matter is that Congress' appetite for continuing the holding of these Americans, including Pastor Brunson, is zero.
Yeah, 100% lockstep with the President of the United States. Look, President Erdogan can act all he wants like this is a negotiation between equals, Jay, but look, who's buying F-35s from who? Whose economy needs the other more? Is it the United States or is it Turkey? Both President Trump and President Erdogan understand what the answer is there, and the United States Senate and the United States House have already acted, Jay. They've already acted to stand behind the president. If President Erdogan drags his feet on this, the pain is just going to escalate.
All right, let's go right to the phone. Sharon in Kentucky on line 3. Sharon, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Hi, Sharon.
Thank you. Hello. Yes, I have a couple questions for you, and I am standing with you all and standing in prayer as well.
Thanks.
What do we know about his health? And also, what is they putting in guard to make sure that this never happens again to any other Americans?
The latter, I will tell you. I'm going to let Cece talk about his health. I will tell you, it's very difficult because Turkey's picking people off the street. I mean, it's very difficult. There's a travel. I'll get Will, our producer, to check. There's a travel warning to Turkey right now, which again, they had a big tourist economy. It's a big Christian tourist economy. I mean, where this pastor preached, where his church was, Izmir is what we would say in the New Testament. It's Smyrna, but now it's a whole different situation. So I think you have to be, cognitive and realistic as to what the situation is. The travel ban right now it's called reconsider travel due to arbitrary detention. So that's what they're concerned about. Now, as to the pastor's health, Cece?
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, I mean, he's spent almost 2 years in a Turkish prison. So, he has some things to overcome. But he's back in an apartment under house arrest. And, that alone, just emotionally, physically, is a much better place for him to be.
Veronica on Facebook says Turkey seems like more like a regime than a government.
I think that's fair. I mean, it is a government built around one man, and one man only, and not like our country. You have just a president that could come and go for 4 or 8 years, and big, obviously very powerful, important. This is an entire structure. Even a new palace was built for one man. I think that was key right there. Just the structures that have been built for this man, the constitutional changes made so that he could continue to be leader, very similar to what happened in Russia with Putin. Almost exactly the same constitutional changes were made so that Erdogan could continue to lead Turkey. It was a country that used to have term limits. It no longer does. It was a country that used to have a check on powers with separation of powers. It really does not anymore at all. And that has been done by the constitutional changes, by law. So he's convinced the public to put these into place with referendums and votes.
We've got a lot more ahead on Pastor Brunson's case. I know you're praying for him. We encourage you to do that. More of your comments and calls when we come back. Virginia on Facebook writes, stop the sale of the F-35s, impose sanctions, stop all aid until Brunson is home. What exactly does the legislation say?
Jay, the language as it relates to the F-35 says the Department of Defense may not deliver any F-35 aircraft to the Republic of Turkey until such time as the report identified has been submitted. That timeline is 90 days, Jay, so exactly what Virginia is asking the United States Congress has done. And, Jay, just to read to you, one of the reasons is that it is the sense of Congress that the government of the Republic of Turkey continues to unlawfully and wrongfully detain United States citizens, including Andrew Brunson. Hard to be more clear than that.
Nope. How important are those F-35s, Colonel Smith?
Very, very important. They are our most advanced, fighter weapon system. We sell them to select allies, to very few allies. Turkey does not have an aircraft like this. Russia doesn't have an aircraft like this, so they can't even opt to buy it from Russia like they're doing the anti-missile system. So it's a very significant weapons platform. The other thing, too, though, in the NADA is that, or the NDAA, and that is they are assessing whether or not we will continue to supply them with other aircraft and other weapon systems. Erdogan is betting, I believe, that the U.S. will cave in at some point. Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen. And this new legislation actually gives Congress the opportunity to put even more pressure on Turkey and on Erdogan.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I think Turkey, did think that they could kind of call a bluff. And when the president and the vice president said that's not going to happen and we will impose sanctions, I think Turkey got the message loud and clear that unless Pastor Brunson and the other Americans are returned, we are not going to treat you like an ally. You cannot hold our American citizens hostage and still think that you're going to get the benefits of an ally.
What is your sense, Harry, of the with the economy there teetering right now, that this sanctions actually, what impact would that have?
Well, I think the impact of sanctions could be massive. Paul McNamara, who is the manager of a leading global asset management fund with over $200 billion in assets, has pulled all Turkish assets from his portfolio. He thinks that Turkey could implode economically in 2019. So if you add economic sanctions to the NDA bill, the National Defense Authorization Bill, precluding Turkey from taking possession of the F-35s, the United States is in a very powerful negotiating position, notwithstanding Turkey's continuing effort to bluster the United States.
I'm hopeful that we get something resolved this week. So that's what we're praying for. I hope you join us in that prayer. This is a very, very important week. A lot of meetings going on this that we'll be involved in, but others at the government-to-government direct. So this is very, very important. John, let's go ahead and take another call.
Yeah, John in Washington State, line 2. John, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Hey, John.
Hi. Thanks for all you do. You all do such a great job.
Thanks.
I'm thinking, listening to the situation, that it is a complicated thing, and it appears that there are elements within the government, some that want to take a more liberal stand. Maybe they're on the left side of the politics. Others maybe are on the right side. So Erdogan maybe is trying to work both sides to please everybody. Is that a fair statement?
Listen, John, you're right on the money. Politics is complicated whether you're in the United States or whether you're in Turkey, and there is that dynamic is in play. We know that, Cece. You follow the Turkish media very carefully. It's clear.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yes, Erdogan definitely has probably 2 or 3 or 4 voices in his head concerning the situation. So I think what happens, though, is now when the economy is basically on the line because of Pastor Brunson and the sanctions that the U.S. could impose, I think then that's all of Turkey that does not want that. So I think,
It's a very
Erdogan's
expensive pastor to keep in jail.
That's exactly right.
That's the
Erdogan
truth.
now has the decision of, do I let my economy fail because of this, or do I let an innocent U.S. pastor go?
You know, it was interesting. Lamar on Facebook wrote in or put in Facebook, being a NATO member means something. Buying missile systems from Russia goes against that. Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, it does, but it's all provocation. They purchase it, but it's not fully installed and operational. They also purchased the F-35, but they haven't gotten those yet. I mean, so you understand that they're playing very strategically as well. I mean, obviously, you could see how that would be very negative for the United States. It's why that's also mentioned in the National Defense Authorization Act, because you put the most advanced fighter. It's not like Russia would never have access, but it gives them like direct access to use their newest missile system, which is highly advanced, and our newest fighter jet, which is the most advanced in the world, and figure out how to defeat it or figure out how it works, how their system could be updated. So you see how Turkey creates that issue. They're creating that problem for Russia and the United States. So they're putting Russia and the United States right in each other's. Really, they're standing kind of on the side and saying, "Here, you guys then figure it out." We play such a, and I say we, I mean Turkey would say they're such a strategically located country. They think that they can just do all these actions and that you're not going to give up your base, and that may be true to some extent. You'll ultimately give us our jets, but now there's something else in the way. It's not just these actions, also Andrew Brunson, and so Erdogan, whatever he does to save face, whatever action he tries to take, you could say all this, but I mean. This is a President Trump, who has imposed the tariffs on the countries. Okay, I mean, and he's taken actions like this before. So if you're Turkey, you may want to call this bluster, but this is not from this president.
Yeah. So the thing is this, though. Understand this. One of the questions that came in, Sarah on Facebook says, "When do you think Turkey finally gives in?" I'm hoping that there's real resolution this week. Now, look, he's at least he's at home. It could take longer. It could take less. It could be tomorrow morning. We don't know. But I will say this. When do I think that Turkey finally gives in? I don't want to call it giving in. Let's be clear here. This is bilateral, complex negotiations. You have to give face-saving measures to the Turks as well. You're shaking your head,
yes.
Wes.
Yes, very, very important. And
especially culturally.
Culturally, that is so significant. And Erdogan needs to save face for his domestic audience, for the other people in Turkey, especially the hardliners that are there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that the key here, I mean, I think this is the critical aspect of this, is that we need to emphasize the fact that, number one, Brunson is at least in a better situation this week than he was 2 weeks ago, Cece.
That's right. Obviously, Turkish prison for almost 2 years, not a good scenario. And sometimes he was in a cell that was built for 8 that held 22. So, obviously, sometimes he was in situations that were very, very, very bad. So to be able to be home, just physically and emotionally, it is a better place, but still under arrest, case still going forward. So, we just have to see what is going to happen in this coming week.
Harry, as we look, and I'm going to go really quick, Harry, and if I can get Dan in here. Harry, what do you think the critical thing to happen here is? I mean, obviously the release. What do you think the trigger point is? Is it the threat of sanctions?
Well, I think it's the threat of sanctions, but it's also the threat that comes from the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act.
I was going to ask that to you, Dan. You feel the same way?
Yeah, it's a consistent message from the United States, the Congress backing up the word of the president, who's the one that can actually implement these sanctions today. That consistent message has come. That's what we were asking for, and it's now been delivered.
Bipartisan support for this. That's why you have Jeanne Shaheen, you have Lindsey Graham, you've got the President of the United States. So you've got the U.S. government in lockstep together, which how many times can you say that? On how many issues can you say that where Republicans and Democrats are in total lockstep from the far left to the far right and everyone in between? And then, of course, the executive branch as well.
Yep. Americans are being held captive. We want them home. That's what we do as Americans. That's Republican, Democrat, Independent, Green Party, whatever you are. That's going to do it for the broadcast this week. Let me encourage you to pray for Pastor Brunson, pray for our team. And again, a huge thank you to the entire Trinity Broadcasting Network family. We come to you each and every week. We're not paying for this airtime, so we can continue the fights that we're engaged in around the globe.